What would happen, Lawrence, in the world if we do find the origin of life? If we finally take away that unknown?
I think it will, complete in a very important way the human story. Give us a sense of our origins. I think, it will confront religion, but also, I think more importantly, if we're trying to understand life elsewhere in the universe, it's hard to do that without understanding a life on Earth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special edition of Through Conversations podcast, where we explore the truth through conversations with the most brilliant minds. Today, joining me is a brilliant mind indeed. It's Lawrence Krauss. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, it's nice to be with you, at least virtually.
Yeah, it's an honor. Hopefully, in person soon. Last time I had the pleasure of seeing you in person was in Puebla, Ciudad de las Ideas, a while back. So,
Puebla. Okay,
yeah.
I've always enjoyed going to those. They were wonderful.
Yes, they were one of the reasons why I started this podcast. And so seeing your ideas and following since then, it's been an honor. So today I would love to discuss with you a lot of topics, science, cosmos, implications of recent discoveries, the future of humanity, the edge of knowledge as well. But why don't we start where your first insights into science started emerging, when you first saw that was the path for you, Lawrence?
Well, it happened gradually in a way. I've told this story before, but my mother wanted me to be a doctor and my brother to be a lawyer. And it's hard to know if it was because of that, but certainly as a result of that, in one way or another, I got interested in science because my mother more or less told me doctors were scientists. And I had I can't remember that far back, but as far as I can remember, I always had an interest in science. I had an interest in many other things too, but I certainly had an interest in science, and I did want to become a doctor, and I started reading books about scientists and science, and that really is what probably began to turn me on. I had a neighbor who was an engineer, and his son, and sort of we built a model of an atom. I remember that. My parents gave me a chemistry set, which I used to play with, but I think it was primarily reading. I really didn't know, other than my doctor, I really didn't know anyone who was a scientist. My parents didn't graduate high school. And then, so I think it was, reading, which is one of the reasons why I write books, to return the favor. And then as time went on, I was lucky to have every now and then some good teachers. And then it was kind of heartbreaking when I realized I didn't want to be a doctor, when the doctors weren't necessarily scientists. And unfortunately, well, I got interested in physics because it seemed the most fundamental thing and the sort of sexiest part of science, trying to understand the fundamental features of the universe. I read a book about Galileo. I remember that had an impact. But when I was in high school, biology was simply not interesting. It was just memorizing. And I wish now, in a way, that I, had been able to do it at a different time, because biology is very interesting, but at that time it wasn't. And once I decided biology wasn't interesting to me at the time, and then I stopped taking biology, I realized I wasn't going to be a doctor, and that was heartbreaking for my mother. But eventually she came around.
You mentioned physics and biology. Let's tackle first biology. What's interesting in today's world, in the world of biology?
Well, I mean, it's moving by leaps and bounds to be able to change what we mean by life and to explore the basic features that drives life, to be able to manipulate the genome and try and understand the incredible complexity of that, and create and understand how proteins catalyze reactions to create new proteins, and really understand maybe even the origin of life ultimately, which is a challenge, but I think we've made leaps and bounds there. It's a field, because of the ability of new tools to totally be revolutionized. It's a very exciting field, and also to use the tools of physics, one must say, to help understand biology as well.
What would happen, Lawrence, in the world if we do find the origin of life? If we finally take away that unknown?
Well, I think it would be remarkable to do that. I think we'll find a plausible route. It may take time to see if it was the way that life originated on Earth, but I think it will, complete in a very important way the human story, give us a sense of our origins. I think, it will confront religion, but of course religion is robust, and no matter what facts it's confronted with, it seems to survive, even in spite of it. But also, I think more importantly, it will give us a lot of, if we're trying to understand life elsewhere in the universe, it's hard to do that without understanding a life on Earth. And I think much of the hollowness of astrobiology, and which is a field where there's a new field with lots of talk and not much action, frankly. Part of the problem is it's hard to know without knowing what features led to the origin of life on Earth. And when we understand that, we can look for those things elsewhere, and we can look for changes. We can try and see how robust that is. Is there one unique route from which chemistry can turn into biology, or are there a variety of such routes? But it will really help in that search for life elsewhere, both in our solar system and in the rest of the universe.
And it's interesting because I've heard you before saying that we're made of stardust. All of our atoms are made of stardust, and it's one of the most poetic things that I'm quoting you. And I agree. I subscribe wholeheartedly to it. And it's paradoxical because if we're made out of stardust, that would imply that this stardust in itself would have gone to other planets, other parts of the universe. And we've struggled finding life elsewhere. So
it is true. We have no evidence of life elsewhere, and it's been discouraging when we look around stars at other quote unquote habitable planets. There's no evidence yet of even significant atmospheres, much less life. But it's hard. The fact we haven't found it, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, as Carl Sagan would have once said. But it's not easy. First of all, the galaxy is a large place, and it's hard to explore it. And it's amazing. It's remarkable that we've even been able to discover extrasolar planets and even can begin to probe their atmospheres. So already the fact that we're able to do that is remarkable, and it's just the beginning. But you're absolutely right. The conditions, it looks like all that was necessary on Earth for life to form was water, sunlight, and organic materials, all of which exist in profusion, as far as we can tell, in the interstellar medium. And, we can find the bases of amino acids in comets and other things. There's lots of water and lots of sunlight. So life on Earth began about as early as it could have, given the laws of physics, after the early bombardment of the Earth by large meteors and asteroids, and that were then eaten up by Jupiter or deflected to the outer solar system. And so it seems that if we're typical, it looks like life evolves easily. And I'm optimistic. In fact, there was just the Europa Clipper that was just launched the other day. And we'll get to Europa in 2030. It won't be definitive, but it's the first step. I think that the moons of Jupiter and some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, in which there are liquid oceans underneath significant ice, are great places to look for life, because those systems are first of all appear to have all the conditions. There's liquid water. There even seems to be some more evidence of organics if you look at the sprays, the water volcanoes that are emitted, and so there's heat and there's a source of energy. Not sunlight so much, but there's a source of internal energy due to the tidal motion of the planets around of the moons around their planet, and I'm very optimistic about that. Actually, I suspect we will find microbes in those oceans, and the reason it's more interesting than, say, looking for life on Mars is because Mars is not a closed system. We've discovered rocks on the you can go to Antarctica and discover Martian meteorites, and as you were too young, but in 1996, people thought they discovered a meteorite from Mars which had evidence of life and extinct life. And the president had a press conference. It wasn't necessarily correct, but it was evidence that at least, we now know extremophiles could survive small microbes and rocks for the trip from Mars to Earth. And that means that those planets can pollute each other. And if we discovered life on Mars, it wouldn't be clear if it wasn't our cousins. and in fact, one might expect it to be that. Whereas under the oceans of Europa or other moons, those systems are closed. And if we discovered such life forms, it'd be a separate genesis. So, I think I was hearing Elon Musk talk about it. He got it wrong, like he does many things. But it's not that because of the ice covering that makes Europa a great place for life. It's because of the ice covering that it's a great place to look for an independent genesis of life.
Wow, there's a ton there, Lawrence. That ton that we have to go deep into it. But
Yeah.
let me start off with, I asked the same question to Professor Sarah Seeger from MIT last week, actually, where I couldn't remember the movie that I was referring to on the interview. Now I watched it. It's called Life, with Jake Gyllenhaal and with Ryan Reynolds. And the movie is about, they find hints of life, microbial life on Mars. And they pick us up.
Is that a new movie?
It's a 2017, but I strongly recommend it for you and for everyone watching or listening. It's a thrilling movie. And the question is, if we do find microbial life and we start experimenting with it, trying to make it come alive, let's say it's frozen, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it comes to life.
Yeah, I'm sure dangerous things happen and it's an adventure. Yeah.
Do you think that if microbial life, it's maybe I'm very stretching it a lot, but let's say we do find more advanced life, would you be in the perspective, would you be in favor of engaging with it, or would you say let's just not try to say hello?
Well, look, I mean, the most life forms we're in our solar system, certainly the only life forms we're likely to find are microbial life, which itself would be amazing. Because if there are two independent geneses of life in a single solar system, it suggests that life is ubiquitous all throughout the galaxy. It's going to be the question of whether there's life worth engaging with, particularly intelligent life, is an open question. And it took over 4 billion years for intelligent life to arise on Earth in a very quiescent system. It's not clear how rare it is. And I suspect, while I do think we will find evidence of life in our solar system or elsewhere, I don't think the likelihood of finding intelligent life is much, 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 much smaller. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't find it. But if we did, I would be in favor of engaging, absolutely. Because first of all, it's far away. The conversation would be rather boring because, if you're talking 1,000 light years away, you say hello, and then 2,000 years later you get a hello back. It's not exactly a dynamic thing. And since the laws of physics make it incredibly difficult for life to traverse the galaxy, for intelligent life to traverse the galaxy, the likelihood that they're going to send armed armadas to conquer us is minuscule. And it is true that every time, if you look at civilizations on Earth, every time two civilizations met, usually only one of them survived in a way. But I suspect if there was an advanced form of life that we were able to contact, that we could learn from them or they could learn from us, potentially, and that would be profound. No, I'd certainly be in favor of engaging. I'm not as worried as Stephen Hawking was about us being destroyed and whether we should hide out. On the other hand, I think extremely advanced forms of life would have very little interest in us, which may be one of the reasons why it's quiet out there. Because why would they want to talk to us?
How so? Why are
there's nothing to learn? There's nothing to learn. They already understand all sorts of stuff. There's nothing. They already understand the origin of life in the universe and the distribution of life in the universe. And yeah, we're a life form that for them is, primitive, and there are probably others. And so what is there to learn from us? What's the point?
Well, if I can counter that, as of now, we're the only advanced quote-unquote life from this solar system. Isn't that intriguing, at least? Well, there's
Well, of
many
course, it's
solar
intriguing, but I'm just talking about a very advanced form. If you talked about a form of a life that was not too different than ours and not too much more advanced, there'd be a great deal of interest in chatter and learning what they've learned that we don't know and what we know that they don't know. But if there was, remember, our sun is 4.5 billion years old. The universe is almost 14 billion years old. There's been time for civilizations to arise, and while I suspect advanced civilizations don't survive very long, if we're an example, but if they did survive past this nascent stage of internecine warfare and things, if they were really, really, really advanced, then they would have little to learn from us, and they might just like to hang out with themselves. And so I think extremely advanced forms of life will probably decide that it's best to just not interact with other life forms. But if we found things in the right time, there'd be it'd be great, right? It would be fantastic to meet a totally different civilization and learn, as I say, what they know and what their myths are. And in my opinion, it would also be great because it would destroy the myths of religion when they talked about theirs and it was different. But I think that's optimistic. Anyway, I certainly, if we got a signal, I'm not as worried about answering it, simply because the universe is so big that it's going to forever be pen pals and not coming to visit us and vice versa. Not in a reasonable lifetime. If we discovered a civilization elsewhere that was hundreds or thousands of light years away, it's possible if humanity survived that we might imagine launching some kind of mission that would traverse over hundreds of thousands of years the distance between those two systems. It wouldn't involve humans, by the way, in spite of this nonsense about humans becoming star travelers. If we're gonna send out, if human civilization is going to propagate beyond our solar system, it's likely it'll be silicon based and not biological, because humans are not well built for travel in space. Whereas you could imagine small robots or small computer chips that would contain the information of our civilization and would be light, because weight is the enemy of space travel. So the space explorers of the future aren't going to be astronauts. They're going to be microchips.
That might be a compelling case for transhumanism there, Lawrence.
Well, if you want, I don't like isms, but you could call it transhumanism. It's certainly true. Look, humans, even if we wanted to send humans elsewhere, the best way to do it, in my mind, is to, if we were talking about science fiction, is to send an intelligent computer system that would have the ingredients to make humans, and then that would have the recipe, and then it would go on a planet and find the organic materials and create genes and create humans, and then maybe even teach them. But I don't think. I don't see that the humans are necessarily on the voyage between here and there, where I expect humans wouldn't survive.
So you don't believe that we are on a right path towards becoming interplanetary as humanity?
I never use the word believe. I don't think believe is a good word for scientists. Whether it's likely or unlikely. Look, I think we may become interplanetary. I don't understand the fascination of sending people to Mars. I really don't. I much prefer sending rovers to Mars and learning about the planet that way. It's much cheaper and more efficient. And most humans that go to Mars will die. And I don't understand it's a worse place to live probably than the bottom of the ocean. And so it's nice for rich people to spend their money on it, and I don't mind as if they do. But it's going to cost an amazing amount, and space is dangerous, and people will die. And eventually I think we'll have an outpost on Mars, as I think we will on the moon, and that'll be interesting, perhaps from a scientific perspective. but I don't see it as a panacea for our human problems to suddenly populate Mars. And I know the idea is, well, an asteroid could come destroy life on Earth, and that argument in the long term. I think it's easier to destroy an asteroid that's approaching the Earth than to imagine in the near term populating Mars.
The other challenge, the other existential threat is ourselves, our own selves. If we were going to be able to get along together, which is...
Well, that's right. And so maybe one could say, well, we can't get along together, so some people should leave. Maybe, but as long as they remain human-like, and that's, of course, if there really was an outpost on Mars that was separate from the Earth from a long time, then you'd expect them ultimately to evolve a little bit differently. But, they're going to have the same problems there. We can learn an incredible amount about the universe without ever leaving Earth, and we have been. And I understand the idea of adventure and fighting death, and that's what astronauts are all about. We don't do science with astronauts, but the adventure. I testified before Congress once about this with Buzz Aldrin, actually, and I think human space exploration is for adventure. And sure, okay, let's do adventure as long as it doesn't bankrupt the nation. And I'm very happy when billionaires start spending their own money on it, because that's not public funds. And if it rocks their boat or whatever, then that's great.
But so, the main engine that you're talking about is adventure, but along the way, there's stepping stones towards, new discoveries, such as, new forms of alcohol. I remember once when I hosted Neil deGrasse, he said that we can create a new tequila in the space, or there's asteroids that have so many minerals.
Yeah, well, we created an orange Tang. I remember when the astronauts went to the moon, there was Tang was an orange juice compound that was, I don't think you justify these things by the spin-offs. Sure, there'll be spin-offs, but what an awful waste of money to go to space to make a new tequila.
Well,
if you're going to do it, why not? But it's expensive and dangerous, incredibly expensive and sure, we're reducing the cost of sending payloads into space. It's still damn expensive and damn dangerous. And once humans start dying on these little flights of fancy that rich people are doing, when they start dying, it's gonna change the perspective. Look, right now, just the voyage to Mars is likely to produce enough. You're likely to get enough radiation that you'll die of cancer. Just the voyage to Mars, just getting there, much less being on the surface, which is also exposed to hazardous radiation. So generally, unless you had an incredible amount of shielding, you'd probably have to live underground. And so it's not the Mars of the movie with Matt Damon. And it's a hostile, cold, airless space that is wonderfully welcoming to things like rovers. And I think the rovers on Mars are far more poetic than putting humans on Mars. Those little things are alone, wandering on their own. They don't need companionship or sex or love, and they just wander through this. And I find, and then when they take a picture, it's really them taking a picture. It's part of them. I just find it. I'm amazed and fascinated when I see those pictures in movies, and I wouldn't be any more fascinated if an astronaut took the movie.
Well, as of now, if I know my facts correctly, is that Mars right now is a one-way trip. People who are signing up to fly to Mars, they know they're gonna stay there, and that's the end of it.
Well, I wrote 12 or 15 years ago an article, I think in the New York Times, called A One-Way Trip to Mars, saying if we went to Mars, it should be one way. It's the only rational way to do it. Fine, good, okay, big deal. So most of them will be one-way trip. They won't even make the whole trip. They'll be dead. But so yeah, and then they'll be there, and great, and a few of them will populate things, and maybe they'll survive, and over time we'll have maybe a scientific base there, maybe, and that's nice, and that's going to take time and hundreds of billions of dollars, not tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. And sure, I'm not against that in as long as it doesn't bankrupt the real science that we do in space with remote sensors. And so, but okay, it'll be nice, for some people to do that. And I suspect in advance, it sounds romantic to go on a one-way trip to Mars and never come back. We'll see how many people actually would want to do it. When I wrote that piece for the New York Times, I think I went around asking people, and basically everyone said yes, yeah, we do it. All the engineers and scientists that I spoke to at the time. I'm not sure when push comes to shove whether they really want to do that, because it's not going to be a very pleasant life.
It won't, and I think that, like you say, it's a romantic idea.
And a lot of hype. There's certain people who are hyping many things by suggesting they're going to do it in the near future. And I'd love to be wrong, but it's not going to happen in the near future. And by the near future, I mean in the next decade.
I'm hoping that at least in my lifetime, I do see, maybe a huge advancement there. Just because...
I suspect in your lifetime you'll see a base on Mars. I mean, a base on the moon. Sorry. In your lifetime, you'll see a base on the moon. I expect we'll have a base on the moon. There are good arguments for doing that. Whether we have a base on Mars in your lifetime is more dubious, in my opinion.
What's a good argument for you for a base on the moon? I haven't heard that before.
Well, first of all, it gives us a learning experience of how to build and how to, if it's a test base. It's easy to get to. Mars is a hell of a lot harder to get to. And I mean a hell of a lot harder to get to. More expensive, more dangerous, and, it's exponentially more difficult to get to Mars than the moon. So if you're going to test yourself, do it on the moon. You learn how to do materials, how to build construction, how to build bases. And there are a number of things you could do on the moon that are, you could imagine a telescope, a radio telescope in particular on the far side of the moon, which would be shielded from radio signals from the Earth and it'd be more quiet. So you could imagine and you could also look for, water on the moon and try and understand planetary processes. So, because it's not prohibitive, I think a base on the moon as a research facility and a way to learn how to survive and also travel more efficiently is a great first step.
And how can we, if I go to space right now, I'm gonna be taking with me my biases, my ideologies. Probably, I would think that maybe we should name it the United States of the Moon. How should we engage with, if we get to moon, who owns it or how?
We're already talking. Those ridiculous things are already happening. Who's going to own? And there's already going to be internet. People are talking about putting weapons in the Earth orbits. It's awful. Yeah, I mean, look, the reason that the U.S. went to the moon and then stopped is because the sole reason to go to the moon was a national pride and an international competition argument. They didn't care about going to the moon per se or what we learned. It was proving that the U.S. could do it. U.S. proved it could do it, and they said, okay, we've done it. And a lot of science is not the driver. It would be lovely if science were the driver of a lot of these things, but a lot of it is international politics. And there's always a scientific argument that's used that certain science will be done there. But how we handle the moon and whether we agree that it's not the property of any nation and that all nations work together. Ideally, a Star Trek future is a great future where somehow going into space unifies humanity. And it's done it to some extent. When humans landed on the moon, I was alive, you weren't. But all of humanity was together when the first humans landed on the moon. Everyone was watching it from around the world. So space, in principle, can be great. It can unify humanity because it's a human expedition, not an American expedition. Even though the first thing they did was put down an American flag.
Yeah.
And so, in principle, it should be wonderful for unifying humans. In practice, it hasn't particularly done that, has it?
No. You're right. It seems that it's a territorial fight once more, and that's one of the, when I ask this question about space exploration, that really intrigues me, and I know that for my audience as well. My biggest concern is if let's say we do have the capability of going to another planet, the moon or Mars, or let's say another exoplanet, we're still bringing the baggage of what we're doing in the wrong way here on Earth. We haven't solved a lot of things here, and so how can we make the case that going there will benefit not only ourselves together but also the planet? How can we make sure that we're not messing up, like doing the same story of our bad angels of our nature there in space?
Well, I think look, we're always going to bring our baggage wherever we go, and that's a story of human history.
Yeah.
I think if we're smart enough, we can try and recognize that we ensure, and there are protocols for trying to ensure that you don't necessarily pollute the planet right away, especially if you're looking for life. You don't want to find life and discover it's just life you brought along with you. And there are already protocols for that when we send unmanned missions. But I think that the society's evolved within the context of the environment we're in, and if there really were societies, and I'm saying this is really science fiction, and I don't think it's likely in the near future, but if there really were isolated groups of humans big enough to have the social interactions and the bureaucratic infrastructures, or the organizational infrastructures, maybe not bureaucratic, but the infrastructures needed to run a society in a very different environment, one would expect that ultimately those societies would behave differently, especially if they're trying every day to survive. And but I guess I'm not particularly optimistic in that regard. And I think we should enjoy. I mean, I worry that somehow that space is viewed as this panacea that's going to solve all human problems, when I think we should work on solving those human problems here.
Which one would you say we have to be like solving right now of those problems here on Earth?
Well, there are a lot of them, and they're of different character. I was chairman of the board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists that set the doomsday clock for a decade, and so I've had to deal with these things for a lot. Obviously, we have to try and ultimately make industrial civilization sustainable for 8 billion or to 10 billion people on this planet, which is a challenge. We have to do it at the same time as we try to reduce the rivalries, which are, unfortunately, a lot of them stem from religion. So I guess the best thing if I was going to make a scientific world, I'd get rid of religion, because then people would have less reason to hate everyone else. And then I try and get rid of, or at least reduce vastly, the number of nuclear weapons, because every day that's a sword that's hanging over us. Because literally we can destroy all of our civilization in an afternoon with nuclear weapons. And then one would think carefully about how to ensure that that all humans have the necessary energy infrastructure to have water and power. And then that's going to take some non-sustainable activities, especially in the third world. And then we can look at ways to have sustainable power, so that we don't change the climate in a way that produces hardships that cause geopolitical problems. My biggest concern about climate change, and I've written a book about climate change, is not the physical impacts per se directly. Of course, sea level rise, I think, is a big one. It's the geopolitical implications that will happen afterwards when we have millions or hundreds of millions of climate refugees. What geopolitical tensions that will set off that could eventually cause wars that wipe out humanity. Well, this is a very optimistic discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, let's try to it's important to mention the challenges that we face. If not, we wouldn't be able to face them. But
yeah, fortune favors the prepared mind, as I said in the climate change book. I didn't, but Louis Pasteur was the first one that said that. And it does. If you want to think about how to avoid the problems of the future, you should think about what those problems are. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's essential because, you know, at least I'm seeing a lot of just, how do you say, like, not nihilism, but I'm seeing a lot of just not sense of agency that we can tackle these problems because we're swamped with, you know, the news of the day or, you know, social media, all of those things. So it's important to tackle those. But let's switch it up, Lawrence. What do you think are some existential opportunities for humanity? Where's the optimism here on your end?
Oh, I don't know if I'm optimistic, but I like to say that it's no reason to be gloomy. Well, I think the opportunities are all come from science, frankly. The discoveries we can make about ourselves, the discoveries we can make to make people healthier, live longer, live more happily, have lives that are more fulfilling. I think science offers incredible existential opportunities, and AI may help in that regard. It could hurt, but again, we have to think about the possibilities and try and ensure that it works in the right direction. But my goodness, we already look, in spite of the pessimism I've expressed, or at least the dismal aspect of possible futures, people now live better lives that on the whole than anyone than in history, and with availability of resources that were impossible to even imagine, maybe even 100 years ago, and the fact that you and I can talk across the world and have a conversation, I mean, it's amazing. And so I think we need to utilize not just the tools of science, but the scientific process of discovery and skepticism and critical analysis and debate, and encourage that instead of encouraging societies where you can't ask questions or for fear of offending someone. That's, we need to encourage the scientific methodology and process and sense of wonder and joy. And I think then I think the sky's the limit. And so we are going to make amazing discoveries that will change what it means to be human, even in 20 or 50 years. And it's exciting. And as I said in the climate change book, the future is racing towards us like a freight train, but it's doing so on tracks that we've built. And so we have the opportunity to choose that direction. And they're great. There are wonderful possibilities as well as terrible ones. And that's what makes the future exciting, is that it's terrifying at the same time.
Yeah, that reminds me of a TV show just released, Dark Matter, where, multiverses, and they go to every single one, and they see all of the realities. I'm seeing.
I couldn't want that. Anytime it flies in the face of my understanding of science so much. I know that people love multiverses, but anyway, yeah. I mean, it'd be great to be able to sample all the different realities to see what ones are good and what ones are bad. It'd be great. Unfortunately, however, we only have one, and some of us don't even have that one, and so there's a great quote which I gave a lecture in Malaysia yesterday. A great quote by Jacob Bernowski, basically saying science permeates everything, and we have to live in that reality, and we can't make it a game.
Wow. Well, so this is like my conflicting thought that I have, that I can't consolidate, but you've discussed previously, how the quantum world works, how when you don't see, I think it's two atoms, they move, or two particles, they move differently, and then it boils down into, multiverses and realities that we can really... It's just a weird...
It's always boiled down to multiverses, in spite of what people who make movies about quantum mechanics have to say, but the quantum world is very strange and behaves in very strange ways, which we understand, which we can describe and we can calculate with, and it's a weird universe at a very small, and it's changing the way we can do physics and science too. We're being able to manipulate the quantum world in ways we couldn't before, which is going to improve technology in many, many ways. But it's a strange and wonderful world. So the world we see on our scale is kind of an illusion of a much more interesting world, or at least different world. And that's fascinating. That's what science is all about.
It's just, for me, it's very abstract. The conversation of the quantum world. It's just, I don't really understand it. So what would be the breakthrough there? How can we extrapolate
We
those
already have
insights?
breakthroughs. We've been my phone and this computer utilize the quantum mechanics every day. We wouldn't be able to do it. It's semiconductors and utilize the quantum behavior of materials. There's nothing in your life right now that you're using that doesn't depend crucially on our ability to understand the quantum world. And as we develop further, both with quantum computers and developing new materials, and maybe improving ways of communicating using quantum techniques, it will continue to evolve, and even understand how quantum mechanics affects biology ultimately, perhaps. So it may seem exotic to you, and it is in a way, but everything you do depends upon it. And our ability to manipulate, to quantum engineer, is something new in this century, basically. And where it goes, we don't know. I mean, it's the simplest version of a weird quantum mechanical discovery that hasn't yet changed the world, but has changed the way we do some kind of science, is the discovery of superconductivity. That's macroscopic quantum phenomena, where you can have a wire that has literally no resistance. And we couldn't make the large particle accelerators we make in the world today if we didn't use that. Now, I think people thought superconductivity would impact on society a lot more than it has. And of course, we're searching for superconductors that are room temperature superconductors, which would change the world.
Yeah.
But those are the kind of searches that you could imagine a discovery of a close to room temperature superconductor that would change energy generation and transport in a way that might affect dramatically our energy. I was going to say energy crisis, but our energy situation. We don't know. That's why we know that we don't know. My book, The Known Unknowns, is about. But more exciting still are the unknown unknowns. But as I like to say, those are exciting, but they're a very short book.
Yeah.
But every day we're surprised, and when we continue to explore nature, we are surprised. And so, who knows what's around the corner?
Yeah, we're definitely. It feels that reality is accelerating. Throughout, with the advancements of technology, everything, it just feels faster. Everything, the insights that we're finding, and so.
Yeah, well, everything is going faster, and the question is, can we keep up? As a society, can we keep up as humans with what's with that? And we're not, it's not clear. I mean, things are going so fast. It's not clear we can keep up with even the technology we're using. And people are concerned about the way children are behaving in schools with phones and all of the things they can, and social media things that are affecting our society. Some people think in dangerous ways. So we're learning to technology is moving faster than we may be able to, culturally, than we may be able to adapt to it easily. And there are problems that are going to result. Hopefully we'll eventually be able to resolve those and work backwards and try and fix some of the problems that have happened. But it's certainly, technology is evolving so fast that it's not clear how well we'll be able to handle it.
Wow, we can expand on that, but I would love to get into the unknown mysteries, not the unknown unknowns. Like you said, it's a short book, but what I asked the same question previously. But what are some of the I don't knows, quote unquote, the I don't know the answer to about the universe, about reality, that kind of take away your sleep, Lawrence. Take away, keep you awake at night.
Well, sometimes they keep me awake at night, but they used to. Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, one of the reasons I wrote that last book was because the questions at the forefront of science are the very same questions people have, we've all had about the universe. Namely, how did life originate? Are we alone in the universe? How did the universe begin? How will it end? Uh, uh, what's the nature? What's the nature of life? What's the nature of consciousness? Can you travel in time backwards? Is our universe unique? Are there many universes? There's so many questions that are the same questions that people do ask that really are at the forefront. But in order to understand how close we're getting to be able to really address those questions requires a lot of intellectual baggage, which is why I wrote the book. If you're going to talk about what we don't know, first you have to get some sense of what we do know. And that's why I use that as a way to try and understand those fascinating questions. Is quantum mechanics fundamental? Is at the very smallest scales does the universe really behave that strangely? And can we manipulate life? Will we be able to create new forms of life that are different than the kinds we know? Is that possible? Can people live forever? Although, which I hope not. But anyway, I mean,
yeah, that was actually my question. The I don't know that feels that a lot of people are, well, not a lot of people, but it's gaining traction, especially trying to make us live longer, is the concept of death. Should we consider that as a potential reality where none of us, where we're born but we don't die? Like, how does your own understanding of our finite existence shape your worldview? Like, what would happen if we solved death? How would that change?
Well, those are good questions. My answer to many questions is I don't know. I think if we didn't die, it would be be terrible for humanity. And there's one of my favorite Woody Allen lines is that eternity is a long time, especially near the end. And that's why I can't understand why people crave heaven. The idea of living forever with everyone even the people you like, much less the people you don't like, it just seems to me awful. But if we didn't die, of course, remember, it would change society tremendously. Then the question is, obviously, if you have children, then things exponentially grow, and then what about jobs? I mean, do you have the whole economics of humanity would change? It would be a very different thing. Now, it already is changing because as people live longer, people used to retire at 65. And then leaving jobs open for younger people. But as people are working in academia, I was a chairman of the physics department, and I worked hard to get my colleagues to retire at 70, even though they could still work and have an office, but at least would open up positions for young people. And now I know very few people who retire at 70. I retired from my academic career, but people are going 80, 85, 90, and they're still productive. So this that's fine, but ultimately, obviously, you can't. That's not sustainable. If you're trying to encourage young people to come in and have jobs. So it's as society gets older, and we have to take care of older people as well. But we also could consider people having 1, 2, 3, or 4 careers. It's a totally different kind of sociology. It's interesting to imagine, but it's going to take time to adjust to it.
And it's a weird question because at the same time, we're also facing, and I don't want to get, again, doomy, but we're facing the population collapse, throughout the world. That's another challenge in itself, and I think a whole conversation in itself, how to solve that. But I wanted to ask you, one of the unknowns that we are trying to solve, Lawrence, is consciousness. How did consciousness emerge? Where is it? And so I would love to hear your thoughts on, what consciousness is on your perspective. How did it emerge? And also, this is for now you've heard me with my weird questions, but it makes me curious to, with the idea that consciousness did emerge here on Earth with us. Does it imply that maybe there's a form of universal consciousness? I don't want to get into religious aspects of it, but does it imply that, maybe it's not a physics attribution of the universe, but maybe just, if the formula is there, maybe it can be elsewhere?
Well, there's a lot of questions there. I spend the last chapter of my book is on consciousness, and it's the hardest subject, which is why I left it to the last, because we don't know we can't even define consciousness,
right?
Much less know how it originates. It's amazing how little we know about consciousness. And as I said, that we eventually may learn about consciousness by creating consciousness. It could be that because we can't even understand consciousness in humans, because if I ask you questions about why you're doing things, I'll get answers that are not really the reasons why you're doing things. And so it may be that we'll only learn about consciousness when we actually create intelligent systems that are self-aware. Maybe that's the way to learn about it. But consciousness is clearly a emergent property of a very complex system, the human brain. And whether my dogs who are sleeping here are conscious or not is a question of debate. I like to think they are, but who knows? So it's emergent, but that doesn't make it in any sense some kind of existential thing that I'm always amazed when people say, okay, a consciousness emerged here, and therefore there's a universal consciousness or something. I don't see how one has anything to do with another. I mean, mountains emerged here, yet they're not mountains on gas giants. I mean, the properties of the Earth are the properties of the Earth that life developed. And the key question is there consciousness elsewhere? Has life evolved to become self-aware and conscious? And that's the key question we want to know. I suspect it's extremely rare. It's certainly not ubiquitous. It's certainly not everywhere. Most of the universe is inhospitable to life. Most of the universe is trying to kill us on a constant basis. And so the notion that consciousness is some property of the universe, I don't understand that extrapolation anymore, because we exist in a remote corner of our galaxy, and we're lucky we do. But it's certainly clear that in most of our galaxy, situations like we exist in don't even exist. And so the fact that consciousness arose here is fascinating, but it's not a generic property of the universe. It's an emergent property of a system in one specific location, and maybe, if we're lucky, in other specific locations. But we don't understand it. It's one of the most important known unknowns in science.
Yeah, and it goes down into another rabbit hole. Free will, lack thereof, a lot of things that we can discuss in the future, Lawrence. But as we begin to wrap up, you also you've worked hosting the Origins podcast, and as a fellow interviewer myself, I would love to hear your favorite interviews on your show. Also, like, what do you like about interviewing other people that maybe you admire, or you like their work, or just you want to know more about them? So what makes the Origins podcast special?
Well, I like to have discussions, not interviews. I think discussions are neat. And so some people don't like the fact that we have discussions, and I'm not just asking a series of questions and waiting for answers. I choose people in general with whom I can have an interesting discussion, and sometimes we disagree on things, sometimes we don't. I like to span the full human experience, because science is part of our culture, and that's why we span science and culture and art and literature and music, as well as the details of science. So, what I enjoy is, first of all, it is being able to interact with incredibly interesting people, and doing so it forces me. It's a form of discipline. I mean, many of the people I talk to write books and things, and so I read all their books, and or I read many of them, and that's I just doing 2 podcasts this week, and most of my week is spent reading because I have to read some books. So it forces me to read that. So personally, it forces me to learn things because I have to read things that I wouldn't read otherwise. But also, I like to learn from people who are, and the whole point of it is to expose people to the ideas and people who are changing and addressing the challenges of the 21st century and changing our picture of ourselves. So I love to have that breadth of being able to interact with people who really are having a significant impact, or who are developing ideas that are profoundly fascinating. And I feel fortunate that for some reason or other, I've been able to very broadly interact with that community, not just many Nobel Prize winning scientists, but as you know, people from actors and directors and writers and journalists, and I'm kind of shocked that they want to talk to me often. So I don't think in terms of favorites. I wish people didn't ask me that question, because I don't think hierarchically. It's just not the way I think. There are many parts of my podcast that I've enjoyed. I've enjoyed Noam Chomsky, who's a friend of mine. He's been on a few times. I enjoyed Ricky Gervais, clearly, but also the fact that my friend Woody Allen trusted me to do a long dive into his ideas in history is fascinating, and I'm honored by that. I love talking to Stephen Fry, who I found fascinating. But I find each of the people I talk to fascinating in different ways. So, yes, the fact that there are some famous people that people like to, people like celebrities, so my William Shatner, so that's nice, and that draws people in, I think. But I find many other people fascinating as well. But it's nice that what I like to do is the kind of eclectic mix of individuals, all of whom represent culture and human striving in different forms. And part of my goal is to remove that separation between science and culture. And part of the way to do that is to make it part of our culture. So I have scientists and artists, and I talk to them about science too. And so, anyway.
Yeah, you've also hosted Johnny Depp, which was it was very fun to watch.
Yeah, well, my discussion with Johnny was, I'm very glad that he trusted me. He's very shy. And that I hosted him in front of 3,000 people. It wasn't quite in my office. And so that was a remarkable evening, and one that I'll always remember. And I'm thankful that he trusted me for that, and that we worked through some things beforehand. And I'm happy I was able to demonstrate to the world facets of Johnny Depp that I think they didn't realize. And so that's always great, is to explore people and have people understand people better than they did before.
Yeah, so, and anyway. Like you say, it's science. It does seem like throughout our conversation, one of the implied messages is that it feels that science may be under attack in some ways, and so
yeah, it is. I talk about that a lot in some recent podcasts. I mean, I'm trying to expose some of that, so that I think that once people realize what's going on, they'll hopefully try to stop it.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's a whole debate in itself. What's happening throughout science, because we've also seen, at least in colleges and universities, the fail of replication of experiments, the peer review process, all of those things that at the same time open a loophole that we can debate on. But Lawrence, it's a whole conversation in itself.
Yeah, we can have that conversation some other time. I'm just finishing today, actually, a new book an anthology that I'm editing called The War on Science, where I have 39 well-known scholars talking about the attacks on free speech and open inquiry, and from all sides of the political spectrum and from all disciplines. I hope it'll have an impact, and I'm finishing the edits on it today and sending off to publishers if I get off this podcast.
Congratulations! Yeah, I'll let you get to it. Hopefully, I'll read that book in the future. And Lawrence, thank you for joining me. Hopefully I can host you again. There's a ton of things that I'm surely we can discuss on in the future.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of things we left to discuss, and I enjoyed it. Thank you. And I hope your listeners do as well. So thanks for having me.
Of course, my pleasure.